Welcome to the Deep Dive. We sift through stacks of sources to pull out the key insights for you. Today we're diving into, well, a pretty intense topic, the world of spiritual warfare. Our main source is Father Chad Ripperger. He's an exorcist, a Thomistic psychologist, so someone with a very direct experience. And our goal here is really to unpack his views on how demonic influence might be operating today, what he sees as the roots of the current spiritual climate, and crucially, what practical steps he suggests for defense and healing. Some of this might hit closer to home than you think. We've looked at several interviews and talks he's given, covering everything from demonic tactics to sacraments, spiritual discipline. It's quite a bit. So let's get into it. Now, let's start with this analogy Father Ripperger uses. It's quite striking. He compares the current situation both in society and, he argues, even within the church to an abusive marriage.
Yeah, it's a powerful comparison. And what's key, he says, is how the tactics line up. Think about how an abuser works. Gaslighting, putting the victim down, trying to control them completely. He argues the demonic, or those influenced by it, use similar methods. They'll feed you lies, things designed to hurt you psychologically whether they're true or not. The whole point is to get you to accept that lie. Because once you accept it, you're weakened, you're diminished, much easier to control. He gives the example of, say, people holding traditional Catholic views being broadly accused of things like racism or heresy.
Right. So if you find yourself facing what seem like these kinds of false accusations, what's the advice? Because the instinct is to defend yourself, isn't it?
It is, but Father Ripperger cautions against that. He says you don't legitimize the accusation by playing defense. You don't get drawn into saying, no, I'm not a racist. Where did you even get that idea? Instead, you address the abuser's behavior.
Oh, okay. So you turn it back on them.
Exactly. You might ask something like, do you often accuse people of things they haven't done? Or is lying something you struggle with? It shifts the focus to the real issue, their behavior, their accusation. He actually compares this to classic communist tactics. They put out a lie, everyone knows it's a lie, but you're expected to act as if it's true. The power move is refusing to operate within that false reality.
That's a fascinating strategy. And then you mentioned he shares something really hopeful from an exorcism, something about the bigger picture.
Yes, this is quite something. During an exorcism, apparently a demon cried out under duress, "He's about to take my power away from me." And the he refers to God the Father. Father Ripperger interprets this as applying primarily to the church, but also, sort of by extension, to the whole geopolitical scene.
Wow. So what does that imply?
Well, it raises the question, why are we seeing, in his view, so much increased tyranny? He mentions places like Australia as an example, and so much widespread lying. His interpretation is that the demons are panicking. They sense their time is getting short, so they're overplaying their hand, getting hasty, scrambling for control.
Like a cornered animal almost.
Kind of, yeah.
Yeah.
He connects it to Our Lady of Fatima's message that when it looks like the whole world is overcome by communism, that's when God will step in. He points to things like the rapid global economic shutdown as evidence, in his view, that we're there. Things might get worse for a bit, he suggests, but it's actually a sign that liberation is closer than we think.
Okay, so that's the current state, this intensified battle. But why now? What does Father Ripperger say is driving this escalation in spiritual warfare?
He makes a very direct link. The amount of influence demons have in our lives, he says, is directly proportional to our sin, both the amount of sin and the kinds of sin. God permits this affliction, this demonic influence, as a way to chasten us, to correct us, basically.
So it's not abandonment, it's more like a tough love kind of correction.
That's the idea. And he argues that when sin starts at the top, like within church leadership, the impact is way bigger because they hold the primary spiritual authority. He sees a historical pattern here. When humanity sins and rejects God's grace, God sometimes, in a sense, retracts that grace. And that lack of grace allows periods of increased evil to flourish. He points to things like the rise of Hitler or the societal decay he perceives now, because grace, in Thomistic thought, enlightens the mind, strengthens the will. Without it, you get spiritual and moral decline.
It sounds like he's describing a major spiritual weakening then. He used that phrase, a nuclear bomb hitting humanity.
Exactly. He argues there's been a huge loss of what he calls supernatural faith. That's faith as an infused virtue from God, not just, an opinion or intellectual agreement.
How does that show up practically?
Well, he points to widespread disbelief, even among Catholics, apparently, in really core teachings, like the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist, the actual belief that it is Jesus. And beyond that, there's an absence of the fear of the Lord, which isn't being scared of God in a servile way, but more like a profound reverence, a deep fear of offending him because you love him.
like not wanting to disappoint someone you deeply respect.
Precisely. But he observes that many people seem to prioritize human respect, what others think, over God's truth. They just do what they want without much thought for offending God. And this leads to what he terms diabolical disorientation. It's a breakdown of the moral compass, where sin gets praised and virtue gets mocked. Cut off from God, we become like people outside the Garden of Eden, easily fooled by any self-proclaimed expert pushing a new normal, thinking we can just decide for ourselves what's right and wrong.
So if that's the big picture, how does this filter down? How does this increased warfare affect us personally, our families? What are the specific targets?
Okay, this is really crucial in his view. He says demons make a specific strategic point of attacking marriage.
Why marriage specifically?
Because they know if they can damage the marriage, they can damage the children, especially when they're young and vulnerable. Wounds inflicted through their parents' relationship or sins within the family. These things make those children grow up more easily controlled, more susceptible to manipulation later in life. Psychological wounds from sin, trauma, abuses, these create openings.
It sounds like a real battleground for the mind then. And our emotions seem central to this.
Oh, absolutely. He stresses that demons have access to our imagination, our memory, and importantly, our emotions. This is why, he says, every saint warned against just following your feelings in the spiritual life, because demons can manipulate those feelings. If your emotions are driving the bus, you could actually be under their direction without realizing it.
It's quite a sobering thought.
Mm.
What about this diabolical obsession he mentions? You hear that term sometimes.
Right. Obsession is about persistent, intrusive thoughts, images, urges that are imposed from the outside by demons. It's not just your own negative thinking. And he notes, based on reports from several top exorcists, a really concerning rise in this. They estimate maybe 25% of U.S. adults are affected to some degree.
25%? That's huge. What's driving that, in his view?
He points primarily to the prevalence of pornography as a major gateway. The goal of demons, he explains, is to make us psychologically compatible with them. They try to conform our thinking to their way of thinking, disordered, sinful, so we develop their bad habits, making us much easier to influence and control.
Okay, so obsession is internal thoughts, feelings.
Right.
But you also mentioned depression. That's different.
Yeah.
Affecting external things.
Yes, exactly. Oppression deals with external stuff. Problems cropping up in your finances, your relationships, maybe unexplained health issues, persistent trouble sleeping, things outside your mind, basically. Demons don't technically have the right to mess with these areas, he says, but they do it anyway. They're hoping you'll get discouraged, feel like a victim, and just give up. They want you to think, oh, there's nothing I can do, this is just my life.
Okay, so faced with all this obsession, oppression, this general intensified warfare, how do we fight back? What are the practical tools Father Ripperger offers for, Catholic self-defense?
Right, the practicals. Number one, absolutely essential. Stay in a state of grace. That means regular, good confession to deal with sin and frequent Mass, receiving Holy Communion wordily. That's the foundation. Second, consistent use of Catholic sacramentals. These are things blessed by the Church that convey grace.
Like what specifically?
He strongly recommends things like St. Benedict medals. They have an exorcism prayer inscribed on them. Place them over doors and windows. He even suggests burying them, along with things like exorcised salt blocks and miraculous medals, in the four corners of your property. It acts like setting up a spiritual perimeter fence, basically.
That's very concrete, burying medals and salt.
Yeah.
Okay. What about tackling those external oppressions? The finances, relationship stuff.
Here, he emphasizes our natural law rights. You have rights over your property, your good name, the fruits of your labor, and you can actively verbally assert those rights against demonic interference. He suggests literally binding the demons.
Binding them.
By commanding them. You can say something like, I reclaim my rights over my finances or health or whatever. Anything I might have unknowingly ceded to you demons, I take it back now. Get out. You have no rights here.
He claims this verbal assertion of authority has a powerful, often immediate effect.
Interesting. And what about family? Can parents do anything? Absolutely. Parents, he says, retain spiritual authority over their children, even adult children, because of the fourth commandment, honor your father and mother. They can command demons in relation to their kids, binding them from harming them. He also mentions bishops possess immense spiritual power over their territory, their diocese. They could, he argues, have a huge impact on even the political situation by using binding prayers or minor exorcisms over their region, though he notes many may not realize or utilize this power.
So that covers the external defenses and asserting authority. But what about the internal healing? those psychological wounds that make us vulnerable.
Yes, healing those wounds, which he defines as damage to our faculties like intellect, will, memory, emotions, is critical. And that's where virtue comes in. Developing virtues like temperance, moderation, justice, fairness, fortitude, courage. These aren't just nice ideas, they actively heal us psychologically. How? By helping subordinate our lower faculties, our emotions, our imagination back under the proper control of our reason and will, guided by faith. This process overcomes the disordered emotions demons love to exploit.
So virtue isn't just about being good, it's about becoming psychologically whole and strong.
That's a good way to put it. And he also strongly recommends devotion to Our Lady, especially as Our Lady of Sorrows. He suggests actually asking her directly, "What's at the root of my woundedness? Help me see it." This prayer can bring the grace needed for insight and healing. He points out that Mary endured immense suffering but remained spiritually unwounded because she never resisted God's will in it. So, learning to accept suffering in a rightly ordered way, uniting it to Christ's, that itself becomes a path to healing.
Wow. Okay, this deep dive into Father Ripperger's perspective certainly paints a picture of, well, an intense spiritual reality, more intense maybe than many of us realize. But there's also real hope and a clear path forward offered here.
Definitely. And what's maybe counterintuitive, but really central to his message, is that this intense spiritual warfare isn't a sign God has abandoned us. Quite the opposite. He sees it as a sign of God's presence, a sign that God is actively working, calling us closer, pushing us to develop serious virtue. So paradoxically, when the struggle is hardest, that's when God is nearest, calling you to grow.
So what does this mean for you listening right now? It means that even when things feel incredibly difficult, when the spiritual struggle is intense, your perseverance, your fight for truth and goodness is absolutely not for nothing.
In fact, Father Ripperger would say it's precisely through these battles, fought with faith and God's grace, that we have the opportunity to achieve, a higher place in heaven, a greater glory.
So the call seems to be, bunker down in your spiritual life, keep up the prayer, the penance, actively fight back using the tools available.
And trust that God will give the grace needed, Father Ripperger assures, if you are genuinely trying.
A challenging but ultimately hopeful message. Until next time, on The Deep Dive, keep digging deeper.